Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, the Taliban are preparing to stage a parade showcasing some of the military equipment they captured after President Biden defended his pullout decision. Biden said the withdrawal ends an era of military operations to remake other countries. The UN, meanwhile, has warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan, urging countries to provide funding following the US withdrawal. Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian says Tehran will not accept retraction of talks with the US to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. Amir-Abdollahian said Tehran is not skipping the negotiating table, but Washington must speak respectfully to Iran. The seventh round of the talks were halted for the presidential elections and subsequent change of administration in Iran. The Arab coalition says it has intercepted 3 explosive-laden drones in Yemeni airspace launched by the Houthi rebels. Coalition spokesperson General Turki al-Maliki said Houthis are deliberately targeting populated areas and civilian infrastructure. This comes just a day after 8 people were injured when the Houthi drone targeting the Aba International Airport was intercepted. A consignment of the Russian Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine purchased by Pakistan has arrived in the country. This is the first Sputnik V vaccine consignment to have reached Islamabad. Meanwhile, a new coronavirus strain named MU has been designated a variant of interest by the World Health Organization. Well, those were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. In Afghanistan, the Taliban are preparing to stage a parade showcasing some of the military equipment they captured after President Biden defended his pullout decision. Biden said the U.S. faced a choice between leaving or escalating and added that the evacuation was a great success. He said the withdrawal ends an era of military operations to remake other countries. The UN, meanwhile, has warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan, urging countries to provide funding following the US withdrawal and the Taliban takeover. Though the Taliban are celebrating the withdrawal of foreign forces, they're facing a daunting challenge to revive the crumbling economy. Also in Panjshir, the group is facing resistance from a local militia led by Ahmad Massoud. A senior Taliban leader has said that the fighters have surrounded the province, calling on rebels to negotiate a settlement. For more on this, we have with us Lieutenant General retired Talat Massoud. Sir, thank you for your time. Mr. Massoud, President Joe Biden made a forceful defense of his decision to leave Afghanistan, telling Americans he refuses to send another generation to fight in a forever war. Why did the U.S. prolong this war so long and now make an abrupt pullout?
Well, I think President Biden obviously was defending his decision to adhere to the withdrawal timelines. And he did not mention much about the chaotic disorder that accompanied it. So I think he was just trying to say that whatever the mission was of the U.S. in getting involved in Afghanistan was already fulfilled. And and I don't think he really elaborated on that mission, except to say that, it was meant to kill Osama bin Laden and that they succeeded. So I think their mission of having an inclusive government in Afghanistan and also having a modern Afghanistan and trying to sort of build a completely different sort of Afghanistan altogether people. You cannot transform a country by someone else. It has to come intrinsically. It has to come through the education of the people, through their understanding of how the world functions, what are their national requirements. I think that was completely ignored. And then, of course, U.S. and the Western world sort of targeted a very selective sort of an approach in the sense that they developed a certain class in cities. No doubt that they were able to transform them, give them good education, health facilities, and exposure to the world. But the rest of the country remained as backward as ever, or under the influence of forces like Taliban. So the Taliban had to return in that sense, and you saw what happened.
Right. Mr. Masood, President Biden has blamed Ashraf Ghani's government for unassailable Taliban's takeover. Should the previous Afghan government be only held responsible for this defeat, or the U.S. hasty withdrawal was also the main reason?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, but the fact is that the previous Afghan government was really not a people's government in that sense, that it did not have the support, and it was relying heavily on the U.S. And external support of the Western world. So I think that has to be realized, and they did not transform, Afghanistan fundamentally. And then I think there is also a very major lesson to be learned, that you cannot have another country transform people, of another country. It has to come from within. And the leadership has to be thrown from within. You cannot impose leadership by outside forces and expect that there would be a change. So there were certain fundamental flaws in the whole approach of the Americans. And then they came out with a very ambitious plan initially, saying that, they will transform the attitude of the Afghans towards women, which was a good thing, but it can't come by imposing your will on them. It has to come from within, through education, through exposure to the foreign world, through understanding the benefits of education for women as to how it will really transform the generations in Afghanistan. All that was not done, and it was also, again, very selective. And then Afghanistan was a very sort of a traditional and an old society. And so that also was a great disadvantage. Then the neighborhood was also very turbulent. So there are several factors, I think, which were responsible for what all happened.
Right. Mr. Masood, now the U.S. says that the Taliban will have to earn their legitimacy and support by meeting their commitments and obligations. Do you think the Taliban will be able to gain support of the international community in near future?
Well, I think much would depend how they conduct themselves. If they really take care of, if they do not go after their opponents in the way that, they did last time. And if they really conduct in a way which brings about greater cohesion and unity amongst the Afghans, I think that would be rewarded by the international community. But the international community is very closely watching their commitments and their words, their statements are matched with their performance and with their policies. So I think that would be very important for the Afghan leadership to ensure that they really conduct themselves in a way which harmonizes with what the world expects of any country, and especially a country which is under close scrutiny.
Right, Mr. Masood, fighting between Afghanistan's resistance forces and the Taliban fighters is reportedly raging on various regions of the Panjshir, Parwan and Baghlan provinces. Can the unrest spread to more provinces, and whether the Taliban are able to contain this?
Well, I think they will be able to overcome the resistance eventually, although I think in Panjshir they are having very serious opposition. And the Tajiks, a certain group amongst Tajiks is very much opposed to them, which is under, the former Shah Massoud's party. So I think there will be resistance from there, but ultimately they will have to, it will be overcome. And what I feel is, what is important is that they should seek a political solution to all these problems. They should work for a political inclusion of all these groups rather than use your military force alone in order to overwhelm them and to subjugate them. Because you can't treat your own people as subjects. You have to treat them as equals. And you do not give them an opportunity to express, a different viewpoint and so on. So I think all these things would matter eventually for the peace and stability of Afghanistan.
Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, thank you for speaking to Indus News. And now we're moving on. The European Union says Afghanistan's scenario shows that the bloc must strive for greater strategic and decision-making autonomy. EU Council President Charles Michel says the bloc must take action to be better prepared for military evacuations if and when needed. Earlier, Policy Chief Joseph Borrell also decreed that the EU and the US were united in Afghanistan, but withdrawal timing and nature were set in Washington. In an article, Borrell said the evacuation from Afghanistan is a wake-up call for Brussels and that it must build its own strategic abilities. He said the Europeans found themselves depending on American decisions in Afghanistan. He noted that a more strategically autonomous and militarily capable EU would be better able to address the challenges. The policy chief said the events in Afghanistan should lead to deepening the Atlantic alliance. Iran's new foreign minister says that Iran will not accept retraction in talks with the US over the revival of the nuclear deal. The minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian said negotiation for the sake of negotiation is not Iran's policy for protecting its interest. Amir Abdullahian made these remarks in a phone call with his Croatian counterpart. He said the US should know that it can only speak to the Iranian people with respect. The minister said it will take 2 to 3 months before the new administration in Iran settles down and starts planning. But he added that Iran is not skipping the negotiating table. The EU has stressed the need for a resumption of Vienna talks, but no specific timetable has been set by the parties involved. The Arab coalition says it has intercepted 3 explosive-laden drones in Yemeni airspace launched by the Houthi rebels. Coalition spokesperson General Turki al-Maliki said Houthis are deliberately targeting populated areas and civilian infrastructure. This comes just a day after 8 people were injured when a drone targeting the Aba International Airport was intercepted. Earlier, Pakistan and the US condemned the strike on Aba Airport. In a statement, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said these attacks endanger Saudis as well as over 70,000 US citizens residing in the country. Blinken called on Houthis to uphold the ceasefire agreement and engage in peace negotiations. Israeli forces have martyred another Palestinian in the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah. Witnesses say the occupation troops opened fire at a 39-year-old Raj Jadala and left him to bleed to death. They said the Palestinian laborer was crossing military-controlled area when the soldiers opened fire. This is a third such Palestinian fatality at the hands of Israeli forces in less than a week. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces attacked anti-blockade protesters, wounding 3 with live bullets. Palestinian media said the troops fired live rounds and high-velocity gas bombs at protesters near the border fence. It said dozens of them suffered the effects of tear gas inhalation in addition to cuts and bruises. South Korea says the US is working closely to bring North Korea back to the dialogue table. The country's nuclear envoy, No Kyu-duk, made the remarks after a meeting with his American counterpart in Washington. No said the U.S. remains firmly committed to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula through diplomacy. He said Washington maintains a forward-looking, creative and flexible stance towards restarting the dialogue. Earlier, the White House said the U.S. is open to dialogue anywhere and anytime without preconditions. Last week, the two sides also discussed possible humanitarian assistance for the North to bring it back to talks. Ukraine has called its defense agreement with the U.S. as a new stage in their bilateral cooperation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made these remarks in a tweet while on his visit to the U.S. He hailed the U.S. support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, gaining NATO membership, and opposition to Russian aggression. Earlier, the two sides signed the agreements in the field of research, development, testing, and evaluation of weapons. Washington has also promised Kiev up to $60 million in military aid to counter Moscow's military aggression. Zelensky is scheduled to meet President Joe Biden at the White House today. The World Health Organization says it is monitoring a new coronavirus variant known as MU. The health body says the variant has mutations that indicate a risk of resistance to vaccines. More in this report.
With a slower vaccine pace in developing and underdeveloped countries, controlling the pandemic has already been difficult. While the new variants complicate the efforts, the World Health Body has classified MU, which was first identified in Colombia in January, a variant of interest, saying it has the potential properties of immune escape. Meanwhile, globally, the infections tally has exceeded 217 million, with a death toll of over 4.5 million. The U.S. State Department has raised a travel advisory alert for Canada, while Idaho reactivated the National Guard to help hospitals overwhelmed with unvaccinated patients. Brazil, one of the worst-hit ones, has logged over 800 new fatalities and more than 24,000 cases overnight. Brazilian researchers have found that a molecule in the venom of a type of snake inhibited coronavirus reproduction in monkey cells. This is a possible first step towards a drug to combat the virus causing COVID-19.
We were able to see that the peptides not only inhibited the development of the virus in vitro, inside the cell, but we were also able to see here in Sao Carlos that it was able to inhibit one of the proteins that is very important for the development of the virus and the propagation of new viruses.
The European Union has announced to fully vaccinate 70% of all adults across the 27-country bloc. Meanwhile, the French authorities said they aim to administer the third shot of a vaccine to some 18 million people by early 2022. New Zealanders ventured out as tough lockdown measures were eased for most of the country. However, Australia's Victoria state recorded a jump in new local cases, while the lockdown in Melbourne has been extended for another 3 weeks.
And when we hit the 80% double dose number, which we anticipate will be in November, New South Wales looks forward to having our citizens enjoy international travel. And also, New South Wales looks forward to stepping up and welcoming thousands of Australians home.
As cases continue to surge across the Philippines, prison officials said efforts are underway to inoculate thousands of inmates. In Thailand, opposition threatened to intensify street protests fueled by frustration at the government's handling of the virus outbreak.
A consignment of the Russian Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine purchased by Pakistan has arrived in the country. This is the first Sputnik V vaccine consignment to have reached Islamabad. This comes as the virus claimed another 101 lives over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 25,889. The ministry registered over 3,500 new cases with an overnight positivity rate of 6.63%. 17 million people are now fully vaccinated in the country. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The U.S. has condemned the Syrian army's assaults on opposition forces in the Deir al-Balad province. In a tweet, U.S. Embassy in Syria said the attack killed civilians, displaced thousands, and led to food and medicine shortages. Washington called for an immediate ceasefire and unimpeded access for the UN and humanitarian agencies. This comes amid reports that the Syrian army stepped up an offensive against the opposition forces in Daraa. South Korea will give China the remains of 109 more of its soldiers killed in the 1950s Korean War. The remains and 1,226 related relics were excavated from 6 regions in South Korea between 2019 and 2020. China's Veterans Affairs Ministry says a burial ceremony will be held in Liaoning's Shenyang city. Chinese People's Volunteers fought along with the North Korean army against South Korean and US-led UN forces in the war. Almost 200,000 Chinese soldiers were confirmed killed in the war, with most buried on the Korean peninsula. In 2014, Seoul pledged to repatriate the remains of fallen soldiers and has since then returned 716. In Peru, at least 29 people have died in a bus accident near the town of Matacona along Central Highway. The police said the bus carrying 63 passengers plunged into an abyss in the Andes. The highway where the accident occurred connects the capital Lima to much of the central Andes. Earlier, a bus carrying mining workers in a different part of the Andes also fell off a cliff and killed 16 on Friday. The 2 incidents are unrelated, although bus plunges are not uncommon in Peru. The bus plunges are common in the Andes, where the mountain range traverses the length of Peru and highways overlook tall cliffs. The United Nations says more than 2 million people have died in the last 50 years due to climate-related disasters. In its report, the World Meteorological Aid Organization said that over $3.6 trillion in losses have been incurred due to floods and heat waves. The report showed an escalating trend, with the number of disasters increasing nearly 5-fold from the 1970s to the most recent decade. The report noted that more than 91% of the deaths occurred in developing countries. In the U.S., the Alamdar fire has forced thousands of more people to evacuate from California's Sierra Nevada mountain range. High winds threaten to whip up the flames as firefighters try to stop them from reaching the resort city of Lake Tahoe. The blaze, burning since mid-August, has charred over 191,000 acres of drought-parched forest so far. More than 6,800 large and small wildfires have burned an estimated 1.7 million acres of forest in California this season. Meanwhile, researchers say the cost of the worsening extreme on the U.S. could spike as high as $500 billion by 2050. They say the country could also suffer 59,000 heat deaths annually by that time. An elephant in Sri Lanka has given birth to twins for the first time in nearly 80 years. Wildfire authorities say the twins are both males and were born to Surangi at Pinavala Elephant Orphanage. The facility spokesperson said their father Pandu is also an orphanage resident. Sri Lankan elephant experts said twins were last born to a domesticated elephant in the country in 1941. Pinavala was set up in 1975 to care for wild elephants that needed to be rescued or treated for injuries. It is one of Sri Lanka's biggest tourist attractions. In Peru, people displayed their creativity with recycled material in a mini car contest in Lima. More about the race in this report.
In an unlikely crossover, Dragon Ball's Goku defeated the Flintstones in a crazy car race. The event in Lima's San Miguel municipality saw contestants race in homemade cars built from recycled materials. San Miguel Mayor Jose Guevara lauded the involvement of families, children and parents in the contest.
Families, children and parents show their creativity in this crazy car contest. We saw the winning Dragon Ball car. They were producing smoke. I don't know how they came up with those effects. There was a lot of creativity.
The citizens enthusiastically participated in the event. The overall winners were 3 friends who built a car inspired by the Dragon Ball animation.
We gave it our souls, our hearts, and life, and it's incredible we built this car in a couple of days. And here's the result of the union between 3 friends.
Second and third place were taken by Flintstones and Fast and Furious themed cars. In an
European stocks have advanced after Eurozone inflation data rattled market sentiment in the region. Investors are focused on US non-farm payrolls data of August, which is scheduled to be released later this week. Paris CAC 40 led the gains, rising more than 1%. Italy's FTSE MIB also added over 1%. FTSE and London edged close to 1% higher. The pan-European stock 600 rose more than 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX gained nearly 0.5%. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.